Because I think sometimes also as a society, we really love to talk about, how we're showing up and we're all being the better versions of ourselves. But what happens when you're showing up in a moment where you are actually the worst version of yourself in front of people? Worse for many, in front of cameras. When these unconscious behaviors, when these subconscious triggers are activated in the most inconvenient moments, what does one then do about that? Right? Because all we are ever seeing outside here in society is a reflection of who we are in our personal capacity. Yes, even you is watching this, never me. I'm such a nice person. Everybody else is horrible. Everybody else the villain. Hey? Everybody. It's never you. Your triggers belong to you. They are your responsibility. It's your emotional response. The language that we're using these days, that somebody triggered me, they did that. No, no. Somebody behaved and acted the way that they chose to behave and act. That initiated a response within me. It's my trigger. And therefore, resolving it is also my work. But it's the responsibility we don't want. There was sometimes out here trying to keep it cute, but like, fuck it. Welcome to my messy bedroom. So I wanted to get here and talk about this Real Housewives of Durban, Minnie versus Londi saga and the bullying that's been happening. And I think it's important for me personally to talk about how it has affected me. There's been a lot of commentary and a lot of condemnation. And this video is not here to talk about judging who was wrong, who was right. They were both wrong, they were both right. And talk about how it started and who said what and then who retaliated. Because I don't think that's really what resonated a lot for me. I think what has been important for me to note and what really has touched me very deeply is, I think everybody can, well, most people I think can agree that what we saw and the actions and behaviors of Minnie towards Londi were bullying. Yo, guys, Jesus. Okay. And even though I think that brings in a bigger topic of conversation in terms of what bullying looks like in our society and that it has actually persisted, it does not only happen in school grounds and with children. What I think has been interesting and where I always want to start a conversation from is, what am I observing here? What am I seeing? What do I see in the foreground? Yo, technology. So what is happening in the foreground, which is what is obvious in terms of what I'm looking at, and then what is happening in the background? What is more subtle? What are the themes? Because I think we all had a very visceral reaction, right, to seeing Minnie standing up in Londi's face, screaming, shouting, yelling, pointing her finger, really just being very aggressive, verbally and physically, then invading her personal, Londi's personal space. Then we were there, Kamenwana, on the head. We all saw it, and I think a lot of people were affected. And what I think it brought up for me, because this is not a video where I want to be condemning or condoning anybody's behavior, but the conversation that I think it opens up for all of us is around how people are showing up and what is informing that. Because I think from Minnie's reaction, and I didn't watch all of the episodes in the season, but there were a couple of ones that I did see, it is evident that I think the level of intensity that Minnie is coming at this in terms of her reaction to Londi and some of the things that Londi are saying, it's way too intense for this to only be about what's happening or what we perceive to be happening in that moment in these group environments. There is a deeper root, I think, as to where her need to assert herself um, aggressively, that need comes from somewhere deeper. That need comes from a younger experience, I think, that Minnie has had in her life. And I'm not saying that so that we can put that out here to judge, but for us to then turn that mirror, right? Because, some of these spiritual sentiments that you hear out there, as below, what is it? As above, so below, and as within, so without, and also as without, so within. A lot of these things that we hear, we can repeat them, we talk about them, but what does it actually look like in practice? Because as without, so within, and as within, so without, the way that I interpret that is that everything that's happening outside of me and around me is a mirror for what's happening inside of me. And everything that's happening inside of me is mirrored back in terms of what's happening outside of me. And so I think this is an invitation for all of us. Instead of condemning condemning Minnie, judging Minnie, shaming Minnie, is to ask ourselves how we might also be showing up and what is Minnie's behavior mirroring for us in our personal capacities, right? Because, as I said, the intensity of the reaction, it was a very intense reaction that she's having to Londi. So there are some very intense and big feelings that Minnie is experiencing inside of herself. Number one. Number two, I don't think that when Minnie is standing up and screaming and shouting and asserting her position and her dominance, well, attempting to, I don't think the only person that she was seeing in that moment is Londi. There are a lot of other people and perhaps experiences from her past where she might not, or where she might have felt like she didn't stand up for herself, and that now she's compensating for it, right? And using her as a case study. I don't know her life, I don't know her history, but I think it's a great case study for us to look at the places and the experiences in our life that might have made us feel very disempowered when we were younger. Where you either didn't have the language or you didn't have the agency or didn't even know that you had the agency to stand up for yourself and say that something is wrong, or that you need to assert a boundary, that you need people to be treating you a specific way, speaking to you in a specific way, when you didn't have that language or you didn't have that agency, and therefore felt dominated by somebody else, and that your power was taken away in that moment. What tends to happen is that as we grow older and as we learn tools, or we also acquire what we believe is armor, right? That is going to either keep us safe, keep us insulated from experiencing any of those feelings again. We acquire swords, we acquire weapons that will then also help us fight, whether that be, our mouth, whether that be learning how to fight physically, or whether in this capitalistic society, your weapon and your armor ends up being money and the material things that you've possessed, right? That make you feel that you can be insulated from the hurt and the pain that you once experienced as a child. But what tends to happen sometimes is that this is happening unconsciously, right? The acquisition of the armor, the acquisition of the weapons. What that's coming from is that inner need and desire to protect oneself, right? Because there's a fear that when I was younger, these things were done to me or these things were said to me, and I had no defense against any of it. And it made me feel disempowered, right? It made me feel small. whatever those feelings are that came up for you in that moment. And so we grow up and we acquire these weapons and we acquire this armor. And because it's happening unconsciously most of the time, what we tend to then do is overcompensate, right? And you tell yourself that no one is ever going to make me feel that way again. And so I'm going to get them before they get me. I'm going to cut you before you even have a chance. And then we go around thinking that our reaction to certain situations is just specific to what is happening in that situation and at that time. But I think what was evidenced here with Minnie and Londi, and what we can reflect on, is that you can see that her reaction is not commensurate to the action, right? To Londi's initial one, which some people might have said was Londi initially, making that comment and that statement about Minnie's dress and Ipigo and the wings. Basically, girl, you're looking crazy when we're sitting at a restaurant and you're wearing this huge elaborate gown, right? And Londi has said whatever for her that was cute shade. We're on the show, we're all here to do cute shade. But what Angel told us in this reunion was that basically that was the start of it. And I think Minnie probably felt humiliated because that statement was made in a group of, in front of the people during the people, and so that might have been the start of it for her. But even if that was the start of it, her reaction is so intense. The emotion that I could even feel through the screen when Minnie and Londi would be having interactions, there was so much heat, there was so much energy, there was so much rage. And what tends to live under rage and anger is hurt. And so the invitation for me when I was watching this was, where do I see myself in Minnie? It's not about condemning her and judging her, because that's very easy to do. And I'm not going to sit here and condone her actions either. That is for her own self-reflection with the God of her understanding. What is interesting for me to take away is, where do I see myself in Minnie? Because I think sometimes also as a society, we really love to talk about, how we're showing up and we're all being the better versions of ourselves. But what happens when you're showing up in a moment where you are actually the worst version of yourself? In front of people, worse for Minnie, in front of cameras. When these unconscious behaviors, when these subconscious triggers are activated in the most inconvenient moments, what does one then do about that, right? What do we do now? Because looking at Minnie, it's very easy for me to say, oh, how could she? Terrible behavior, horrible. But when I look at Minnie and I ask, what parts of this are familiar to me? I then have to have a conversation with myself and tell myself the truth. And really, let's take an accounting of the history to recognize that there are times in my life where I too have reacted like this. Maybe not on this scale, and definitely not in front of the world. But for sure, there are times when I have overreacted to situations, which we all have. There are times where in our defense of ourselves, right? And a lot of the time, that's your ego coming up. Let me tell you that. You think that you have to defend yourself. When you are not in your ego, you know that all you have to do is just be, regardless of the perceptions, regardless of what you're actually feeling inside. You know that you just have to be, but your ego will tell you, you need to defend your position. You need to let these people know that they are wrong and you are right. You need to stand up. That's what your ego will tell you. And shout it from the rooftops and beat your chest and tell people that you matter. But when you are within your body and you are present in your body and in your spirit, you know that you don't have to defend yourself to anyone. But we're not always living there. And that is what I would like us to take away from this. There's a lot of takeaways, guys. But it's really like, what parts of yourself do you see in Minnie? And how can you now sit down and have a conversation with yourself and address that? Because in your ego's defense of its image, there are other people that you might have hurt in the same way that Londi was hurt. In the defense of your name and who I am and what I stand for and my values and my principles, you've never hurt anybody? You've never come out looking crazy? Because I find that very hard to believe if you're an adult who has lived your life in any capacity with some level of interaction with other people. So, where do we go from here? What do we say about ourselves? Because as without Minnie, so within. What do I need to learn about how I show up and some of the unconscious triggers that live within me? Because that's another topic for conversation. And maybe we'll do that in another video. Your triggers belong to you. They are your responsibility. It's your emotional response. The language that we're using these days, that somebody triggered me, they did that. No. Somebody behaved and acted the way that they chose to behave and act. That initiated a response within me. It's my trigger. And therefore, resolving it is also my work. But it's the responsibility we don't want. So what I'm here to say is that while we are pointing fingers and calling other adults bullies, when are we taking the time out to reflect and observe in the ways that we might have shown up as bullies to others? Because all we are ever seeing outside here in society is a reflection of who we are in our personal capacity. Yes, even you is watching this, never me. I'm such a nice person. Everybody else is horrible. Everybody else the villain. Hey? Everybody. It's never you. Because where are the people who are going to stand up and put their hand up and honestly say, yes, also me. I have been a bully in my life. The reasons, you'd want to put the reasons and justify it. And everybody's story has context. Everybody's behavior has context. It doesn't mean we condone the behavior, but it's about understanding the behavior. And if you can't start with trying to understand yourself and your own behavior and observe it and call it out for what it is without judging yourself, then it makes it easier for us to sit here and observe other people's behaviors and perhaps accept what we're seeing without judging them. Because also me and also you, we have been Minnie. We are all here. So spare a thought and some time to sit with yourself before judging her for all of the ways that she's wrong and bad. It's Rakgadi's thought for the day. Let me go to work, girl. Bye.